Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's A Perfect Episode number 2, Genre from Westworld. This video is a part of a series of videos where I explore an episode from one of my favorite TV shows that I feel is near perfect and should be examined and celebrated. This series is done in no particular order and are not necessarily my favorite videos of all time, but they are what I consider to be great episodes that I wanted to explore more. In this video, I will analyze the episode Genre from Season 3 of Westworld. So I'll have to start with a spoiler warning for Westworld up to the end of Season 3. If you have not seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video. Otherwise, some things may be spoiled for you. So, generally speaking, Westworld Season 3 is looked down upon as a lesser season, as most people hold the opinion that Season 1 of Westworld was a near masterpiece, but the show went downhill in later seasons. Some people even went as far to say that Season 3 jumped the shark. However, this is an opinion I wholeheartedly disagree with, and in fact would say the reverse is true. While I did enjoy Westworld Season 1, I wasn't nearly as impressed with it as everyone else seemed to be, and in fact, I would describe Season 1 of Westworld as one of the most overrated seasons of television of all time. Season 2, I felt, was an improvement over Season 1. However, at this stage, I would still describe Westworld as a moderately good show. A show that I enjoyed watching, that I would continue to watch, but not a show I would count among my favorite shows, and nothing I would call close to a masterpiece, such as Breaking Bad, or The Leftovers, or The Expanse, or the first 6 seasons of Game of Thrones. That is, until Season 3, which I would in fact call a masterpiece. And this season has indeed elevated Westworld to be considered one of my favorite shows. In fact, I would call Season 3 of Westworld one of the greatest seasons of all time. Now, part of the reason I favor Season 3 over the 2 previous seasons is a genre preference. That is, I don't really care for the Western genre. I never did, so the more the show pulls away from the genre and the more it leans into the sci-fi elements of the show, the more I care for it. And I understand for some who prefer Season 1, they may feel the opposite. However, the cyberpunk feel of Season 3 that the 2 previous seasons lacked is exactly the kind of feel that attracts me to a show, and I feel Season 3 pulled it off wonderfully and much better than most other shows or films. However, that's only part of why I prefer Season 3, as I feel it goes beyond simply genre to the writing overall being much stronger and tighter. A good example of this is the villains. As I'll get into in this video, the main villain of Season 3, Sorak, is a very complex and multifaceted character who works extremely well as an antagonist, but those motivations make complete sense, and he's someone who comes off as believable and well thought out. Whereas in Season 1, most of the villains, that is all the humans that worked at the park as well, like characters of, like the character of Logan, they all came off as flat, two-dimensional bad guy stereotypes whom I could not buy as real or dynamic. A great example of this is the character of Charlotte Hell, who in Season 1 I felt came off as a cliche mustache-twirling villain who was just there to be evil. Whereas in Season 3, Hell, although technically being a different character as she was another version of Dolores posing as Hell, came off as a multi-layered, extremely complex and interesting dynamic person whom you loved to explore. And in the event, it gave the actress who portrayed her, Tessa Thompson, much more to do, and her performance's quality raised significantly. Anyway, one might ask, okay, that's how you feel about Season 3, then why choose the episode Genre? I know my sister, for example, feels the same way that I do about Season 3 of Westworld being a masterpiece and far superior to Season 1, but she once named Genre as her least favorite episode of the season. But for me personally, this is the episode that stands out the most from Season 3. It isn't necessarily my favorite episode of the season, but it's one that I feel is most unique and standalone, and it's the first episode of Season 3 I remember that really blew me away. And also looking through the selection of episodes that I plan on doing for my A Perfect Episode series, there are a lot of episodes on here that, although I love, feature some scenes that are not so great, that deal with some subplots that I find less interesting or not very good. And there were a couple of subplots, to be fair, in Westworld Season 3 I didn't think were all that great, particularly dealing with William, and a lot of the Bernard stuff I didn't find that interesting either. However, in this episode, every scene I thought was great. There weren't any subplots or scenes that I wanted to breeze through, thus making it even closer to a perfect episode. So once I decided to pick an episode from Westworld Season 3 to talk about, this is the one that jumped out at me the most, so that's the one that I went with. So let's go ahead and jump right into the episode, which begins with Sorak narrating his backstory. Now, we had met Sorak in previous episodes and know him as the villain who wants to control the world through his supercomputer Rehoboam, who can predict anything. But here, for the first time, we delve deeper into his backstory, which I was totally here for, as it just fleshes out the whole show and makes it more interesting. It was mentioned before in previous episodes that Paris had been destroyed, but here we get a shot of Sorak looking at Paris being destroyed. Now, it's still not explained how and why Paris was destroyed, but frankly, I don't think it needs to be. I honestly think it's unnecessary information because that's kind of beside the point. The point is that there was a lot of strife in this future world, something that is also illustrated in many clips that show disaster and social strife throughout the world that Sorak vows to put an end to. And that is what is most relevant. Also, this is the episode where we're introduced to Sorak's brother, who we hadn't met before, but we learned they survived the destruction of Paris together, and together they built Rehoboam, which Sorak refers to as a god that they built to save the world. It was amazing setup. We jump from there to the present day where we see Sorak meeting with the president of Brazil, where he tells him that he knows he's shaking down villages in the north and that it needs to stop because there is a resistance movement brewing against him that will create unrest several years down the line. The president doesn't take very kindly to being told what to do and asks if he's threatening him, but Sorak simply tells him that if he doesn't stop, then in 30 minutes the currency of his country will drop to be virtually nothing, which will accelerate the unrest, and he and his family will be dragged from his palace in the middle of the night, and that in 6 months, Sorak will be back dealing with a new president. Sorak then takes his leave as the president slams the table in frustration. So this scene is brilliant in several ways, as it communicates a lot of important information through a very entertaining exchange. First off, we see that Sorak basically runs the world, that he uses the predictions that Rehoboam makes to basically control everyone, including those in power. Although later in the series we'll learn that Sorak is basically being controlled by Rehoboam, so basically Rehoboam is running the world, but that's not touched on until later. Secondly, we see how Rehoboam is used to keep world peace and prevent the destruction of the human race, as it can sense danger and conflict brewing and then can take steps to prevent it from ever happening. For example, it could see massive civil unrest and war coming in Brazil that would likely cost many lives, and so Sorak can simply go there and control the situation. And this is amazing social commentary in several ways. First of all, throughout the entire season, Rehoboam and Sorak are used as an analogy of how the rich and powerful manipulate events and knows the majority of people by controlling the situation. In this case, Sorak mentions how he gave this president power with the understanding that he'd play ball, and when it looks like he's refusing to play ball, he threatens to have him removed, which is a great analogy to how current politics work, with politicians only gaining their position of power due to the wealthy supporting them, and if they refuse to cater to these same wealthy individuals, they can remove their support, which will result in them losing their power, therefore making them beholden to those wealthy individuals, the same way the president of Brazil is beholden to Sorak here. As I said, it's an absolutely brilliant scene. After the title credits roll, we get another look into Sorak's backstory, which comes in the form of a file from Rehoboam, which is narrated by Sorak himself. Here we see that he and his brother gained the financial backing of a billionaire, or possibly trillionaire, Liam Dempsey Sr., in order to create Rehoboam. However, it's not just financing that he provides them with, as apparently Dempsey was the CEO of a social network that had gathered personal information on pretty much everybody, and they fed the information into Rehoboam, which helped create the database. However, at this stage in the flashback, Sorak and his brother are still quite young, possibly in their 20s, and Liam Dempsey Jr., who we've seen as an adult in previous episodes, is just a child here, and at this stage the supercomputer isn't Rehoboam, but an earlier model called Solomon, and it doesn't work as planned. Dempsey names several other failed prototypes before announcing that he's pulling the plug on the project. In French, so that Dempsey doesn't understand him, Sorak's brother suggests to him that they killed Dempsey, but Sorak doesn't think it's a good idea, and he assures his brother that the project will work. Now, we get further commentary here with the invasion of privacy by social media, and how they're basically just collecting a lot of personal information from everyone. Now, in this scene, Dempsey mentions such practices are outlawed, clearly sending the statement that they should be. But he had already collected a ridiculous amount of private info that he still had, which is what allowed Sorak and his brother to build a model that would predict everyone's future decisions and that what they would do, which I actually think is a plausible idea and a very interesting sci-fi thought experiment. So then we go back to the present, where Sorak's underling informs him that they're tracking issues with Rehoboam in several cities. However, the one in Los Angeles is of particular interest because it's coming from Liam Dempsey Jr.'s office. So Sorak now believes he may be a problem and orders him to be taken in. But his underling informs him that they can't find him, and they show when they had last seen him, and there's an image of Dolores there. So at this stage, Sorak is aware Dolores is trying to undermine Rehoboam, and the fact that she has Dempsey makes her even more dangerous, so he orders that they be caught immediately. Then we cut to Dolores and Caleb taking Liam Dempsey against his will and trying to run and hide, while Dempsey insists it's impossible and there's no way to escape from Sorak. Dempsey also tries to convince Dolores that she could never use his access to stop Rehoboam, so she's wasting her time anyway. So this is a very effective setup, as it sets up the stakes for the episode, where Dolores has a goal in mind that she's confident that she can achieve, despite the fact that Dempsey insists it's impossible to achieve, and what we've seen of Sorak in this episode so far would seem to support Dempsey's claim, as Sorak knows everything that's going to happen before it happens. Meanwhile, Caleb is kind of just along for the ride, as he decided to put his trust in Dolores, yet doesn't have all the knowledge or confidence that she does. So it is in fact a very effective setup, as we are left to wonder, is Caleb foolish for trusting Dolores? Is her confidence that she could defeat Sorak misguided? Or is she planning on using and betraying Caleb in order to defeat Sorak? Dolores then informs Dempsey that Sorak thinks he's trying to outbid him on Delos, so either they defeat Sorak or they all die, but this doesn't convince Dempsey, who insists that he'd rather take his chances. As Dolores walks ahead of Dempsey, he tries to slip away from behind, but Caleb stops him and pushes him forward, so Dempsey then tries to appeal to Caleb by pointing out that Dolores used and betrayed him and that she's probably doing the same thing to him. But Caleb doesn't buy it and complains people like him ruined his life and pushed him in to go to war where he lost his friend. So Caleb encourages him to use his glasses to determine who he is, as Dempsey is wearing a pair of glasses that connects him to Rehoboam and allows him to look up anyone that he's looking at and see their entire life story through Rehoboam. So when Dempsey looks up Caleb, he immediately becomes terrified, and he says it's absurd that Caleb thinks that Dempsey killed his friend, and he struggles to get away from Caleb, who tries to stop him, so Dempsey stabs him with a party drug in order to get away. So this is great, as it establishes Caleb as our point of view, as he's still unsure of Dolores, just as we are, but is more inclined to trust her than Dempsey. But when Dempsey looks up Caleb and has an extreme reaction, this signals to the audience a greater mystery involving Caleb, and things aren't what they appear to be with him. We of course later learn at the end of the season that Caleb was in fact a hitman that used to work for Sorak in order to gather up what Rehoboam referred to as outliers so that they could be imprisoned. Caleb has been brainwashed and has false memories implanted, so is unaware of this, and this is a great way to set up for the greater mystery, as it signals there's more to Caleb's backstory than he is aware of without telling the audience what it is. However, the drug that Dempsey injected Caleb with is a drug called genre, which makes the user feel like he's in a certain genre of movie. It begins with the noir genre, so that whenever we are seeing from Caleb's perspective who is on the drug, the scene is in black and white and ominous noir music is playing. This isn't ideal for Dolores, who needs him at his best as they are on the run. They call an automated car to pick them up as a group of men with guns approach them. Dempsey tells Dolores to give it up, as he knew his men would find him, but Dolores tells him those aren't his men, meaning that they are Sorak's men. They try to get away in a car but are in pursuit, and Dolores tries to convince Dempsey to give her access to his key code so that they can take control of the automatic car. Dempsey asks why the men following him don't make a move, and Caleb explains that they're waiting to get them alone where there's no witnesses so they can kill them. And sure enough, as soon as they are in the tunnel, the car is remotely commanded to stop so that the men with guns surround them. Dempsey, still in denial, exclaims that Sorak wouldn't dare kill him, but when the men with guns open fire at them, he changes his mind, then gives Dolores his key code. She then operates the car to get them out of there, but not before handing Caleb a machine gun. So, there has been some criticism about the drug genre, and that it is not a realistic depiction of how real hallucinogens work. As real hallucinogens aren't so controlled and stable, and more chaotic and abstract than what is typically portrayed in Hollywood. And while I generally agree that in general Hollywoodized version of hallucinogens are in fact not at all a real life representation of what it's really like to take hallucinogens, or at the very least they fall short of portraying what it's like, it's a Hollywood convention that I've gotten used to. The same could be said for for Hollywood's portrayal of dreams, as I find whenever a dream is shown in film or television, it isn't all what it's really like to dream in reality, as real-life dreams are more abstract and chaotic and nonsensical than what is typically portrayed on screen. However, whenever there's a dream sequence, I tend to just go with it as an established Hollywood trope. However, in the case of the drug genre being an unrealistic drug itself, as it is too controlled and stable, allows users to jump from genre to genre, while I agree such a drug in contemporary times is unrealistic and impossible, Westworld is not set in contemporary times, it's set in the future, and I find the possibility of a more controlled drug like this existing in the future to be not to be any less likely than some of the other futuristic technologies seen in this season, such as driverless cars. As my understanding of the drug is, there is a digital element to it, which makes it different from what we would think of as a modern drug, and it's more akin to sticking a video game inside your head, and I don't find the possibility of such technology in the future impossible. So I am in fact totally willing to go with it, and the unlikelihood of it doesn't really bother me at all. However, it does occur to me that the creation of the drug genre in the script was done strictly for the purpose of giving the showrunners the excuse to use classical movie genre and input them into this episode, which does come off as a little bit pretentious. However, again, I'm willing to go with it because the stylized sequences are in fact very effective. For example, by adding the noir style to this scene where they're being hunted does in fact add to the tension of the scene. So as they speed away, Caleb switches genres again, and this time we hear the classical song Ride of Valkyries, which I believe is supposed to signify a war movie, most likely referencing the scene from Apocalypse Now where this music was used. It's very appropriate for the scene. As the car speeds away, the pursuers chase them, firing machine guns at them. Dolores then hands Caleb what appears to be some kind of missile launcher, and he kicks off the glass of the roof of the car and stands up and fires the weapon at the pursuers. And missile does launch, but it misses its target. However, it uses a computer lock to lock onto its target, turn around, and go after the car until it hits its target and explodes. Dolores then commands the car to speed up, and when they are ahead of their pursuers, she commands the car to stop, and then her automated motorcycle comes out of nowhere and destroys another one of their pursuer cars, leaving only one car left. So she and Caleb get out of the car and start shooting at them. So not much to say about this scene in an analytical sense, other than it was an amazing fight scene, one of the best Westworld has ever done. It was supercharged, really exciting to watch, pretty much everything I want out of my action sequences. So then Caleb switches genres again, this time to something less helpful to the situation he's in, as the music would now suggest he's experiencing a romance movie, which has him lock eyes with Dolores as she shoots her machine gun, killing people. In fact, Caleb has to snap himself out of it in order to start shooting his gun, so in this case the genre drug is actively interfering with his action situation. Luckily for him though, he's saved by the arrival of Ash and Giggles, guns for hire that he had worked with in the past. And with their help, they're able to kill off the last of Sorak's goons. Giggles recognizes immediately that Caleb is on genre and tells him to watch out for that last act. They then collect Dempsey and go on the move again. Dolores states that she needs Dempsey alive so she can have access to Rehoboam. Dempsey protests that she can't have access as it's read-only unless she's standing right in front of it, and then taunts her that she can't be in two places at once. Little does he know that she actually can, as we cut to the Collins host, who we learned in a previous episode is just another version of Dolores. Collins escorts Bernard into Insight, where Rehoboam is kept, and uses Dempsey's key that Dolores provided to him in order to unlock it, and then sends her all the files Rehoboam has on Sorak. So again, we have an intense chase and fight scene where Dolores manages to stay one step ahead of her opponent despite the overwhelming odds she faces, making this some of the best kind of intense storytelling. So as Dolores leads Ash, Giggles, and Dempsey down into a subway-type transportation system, Caleb switches genres again, this time to a sort of party film as the music switches to Iggy Pop's Nightclubbin', and the lights begin to throb like at a nightclub. Now this sequence I thought was brilliant, as the filming techniques used really do put one in the mindset of being at a nightclub, and the music combined with the blinking lights and the cadence to which our characters are walking in step with the music is just brilliant. It has a real cool feel to it, kind of like the intro to Reservoir Dogs. However, this is juxtaposed with how none of the characters are feeling this vibe, as Dolores, Ash, and Giggles are all business, and Dempsey acts defeated like a helpless captive, and everyone else in the subway system is treating this like a very mundane and ordinary, boring day. Meanwhile, Caleb is just zoning out as the drug is really getting to him. In fact, I think Aaron Paul does a great job of playing someone who is really drugged out. So next we get more of Sorak's backstory with his narration. Here Sorak explains how he and his brother got Rehoboam to protect the stock market, and they used this to entice Liam Dempsey Sr. as they used the stock market to make him $100 million, and he was completely sold on supporting them. However, in their view, Dempsey was short-sighted as he only cared about money. However, the Sorak brothers knew they could use Rehoboam to create a new world free of war, suffering, a less chaotic world. So basically, they planned to use it to control the world, and Dempsey was too blinded by his greed to see it. However, as they continued to use Rehoboam, they discovered another problem, a point where their predictions would fail to maintain this perfect world, and Sorak described that this was due to people he referred to as outliers. That is, people too unpredictable to control, and Sorak began to realize that his brother was such a person, and the fact that his brother couldn't safeguard humanity was starting to drive him mad. So this was, again, just more amazing, brilliant backstory that worked so well in enriching the story and Sorak's character, but also beautifully crafted with some haunting music that really sells the scene. So then we go back to the subway train as Dolores looks at everyone on the train and remarks how oblivious they are that their lives have already been decided for them. So she announces that she's going to send everything Rehoboam has about them to them. Dempsey starts to freak out, telling her she can't do that as it would lead to chaos, suicide, murder, but when he mentions murder, she interrupts him, telling him that is something that he would know about, referring to the time that he tried to have her killed. He apologizes to her, but she interrupts his apology, saying his next words as he says it. She then tells him that it's their data, that they have a right to it. Dempsey protests that they're just some things that people shouldn't know. Ash challenges him, asking him if he should be the one who gets to decide what people do and do not know about themselves. Dempsey then offers to tell them what Rehoboam knows about them. He uses the glasses to read Giggles and announces that he'll be lucky if he ends up dead in the ditch. He then reads Ash and tells her that her little brother, whom she's giving her money to in order to protect him so he can live a good life, ends up a bigger criminal than her. This seems to silence them all, but the whole time Dempsey is talking to Caleb, Caleb is staring at him. Caleb then seems to snap out of his drugged out state and notices a man in a military uniform sitting in the train, which reminds him of his past in the services. He then tells them a story about when he served overseas, that the rats were everywhere, so they would set up traps to make them fall in buckets of water where they would drown peacefully. However, if they filled the water too high, the rats could see the edge and would just swim around for hours trying to get out, but they couldn't. It was just an illusion. They never had a chance, just like the people here never have a chance. Dempsey argues that hope is what our world is built on, but Caleb counters that it's false hope. He then tells Dempsey that he would rather live in a world of chaos than a world controlled by him. And goddamn, this was a powerful performance. This performance alone almost moved me to tears, like every time I see it. It's one of Aaron Paul's better performances, if you ask me. He gets across the power of someone who's suffering, and it's so good. Anyway, Dolores seems moved by Caleb's speech, and knowing what we learn about her by the end of the season, I believe that she was. And it does, in fact, feel that she does, in fact, feel sympathy for him. So she makes the call to Collins, who's standing next to Rehoboam, and tells him to release everyone's data, past, present, and future, to them. Collins states that it will be done. Then, as he types in the commands, he tells Bernard that everyone's lives have been on a train, and now it's time to show them the rails. We then see everyone on the train's phones start to buzz, and we see they're getting the data from Rehoboam. Ash gets a note saying that she's isn't suited to bear children. Another woman gets data that tells her that she's going to get Alzheimer's in 8 years and isn't allowed to breed, while a mother sitting next to her young daughter gets data that tells her that her daughter is prone to anxiety and is going to commit suicide by slitting her wrists in 5 to 8 years. Ash asks Dolores if it knows all of this about all of them, but Dolores answered that it doesn't just know these things, it's what it decides for everyone. So similar to the flashbacks we got with the stock market, it makes it clear that Rehoboam isn't just predicting the future, but it can use those predictions to control the future. For example, it tries to create an overall better future for humanity by eliminating the woman who was going to get Alzheimer's from the gene pool. So in a way, this is a strong analogy to modern times and how classism and society structure is used to control people and determine their fates. Also, Westworld has always touched on issues of predetermination versus free will and asks questions about how much do we really control our own fate. But typically it does so uses synthetic life forms as an analogy, but here it shows the entire human race having their free will removed, and to me that is just a much stronger analogy that really hits home, and I find this most effective. We then get what is, in my opinion, one of the best, most beautiful sequences put to screen. Dolores and her group exit the subway train to see people frozen in shock staring at their phones, making it clear they've gotten the data dumped from Rehoboam. As they exit the station, Dempsey complains that that ruined the lives of everyone at the station, but Dolores clarifies that it wasn't just them, it was everyone. When Caleb asks what she means by everyone, she clarifies it means the whole world. So we hear a string instrumental version of David Bowie's Space Oddity as Dolores and her group are surrounded by chaos. We see dogs running loose, people fighting, people hanging out off of cars without a care in the world, a woman throwing a brick through a window while another guy beats the crap out of someone else. Caleb asks Giggles what genre this is, and he answers that this isn't a genre, it's reality. It's an absolute gorgeous sequence that the instrumental Space Oddity really sells. To me, this does something similar of what the show Mr. Robot did when it portrayed hackers bringing down the entire financial system, creating chaos, and how that freed people. Westworld, however, I think does it better. And I do feel the sequence is better than anything Mr. Robot did. It just sells the moment so much better as it feels earned, and you can really buy the chaos more of having broke free of a machine that was controlling everyone's fates. It was a really amazing scene. It ends with the Space Oddity song ending abruptly as a car pulls up with two of Sorak's thugs with machine guns getting out and opening fire on Caleb. However, Dolores stands in front of him and takes the bullets for him, which of course do nothing to her, and she then kills the two thugs. But Caleb just looks at her in shock as he wasn't aware she was a synthetic life form, and for a while it seems like he's debating whether or not he can trust her, but he decides to continue onward with her anyway. This, of course, was a big revelation that will affect their relationship going forward, so another great moment. We then see Sorak on his private jet, who is smashing the table in anger as he looks at the circle of Rehoboam and sees that everything is in chaos, that everything he worked so hard for is starting to fall apart. We then go back to another flashback narrated by Sorak as he explains that the 10 years Dempsey cast the checks and turned a blind eye to what Sorak and his brother were up to, but he knew eventually Dempsey's curiosity would get the better of him. As he narrates, we see Dempsey approach a facility in the middle of nowhere where people are being held against their will, and it looks like they are being treated somehow almost like a mental institution. There, he finds Sorak talking to his brother, while Sorak's brother is apparently being held. When Dempsey questions Sorak about this, Sorak explains the concept of outliers, those who would disrupt or interfere with Rehoboam's plan. He tells Dempsey that Rehoboam's way of dealing with outliers is to send them into high-risk situations like war, where they can be killed off or rendered inert. And he suggests that what he's doing at this facility is trying to help the outliers to edit people, as he calls it. He suggests to Dempsey that helping them is better than killing them. Dempsey argues that he's not helping them, he's changing them, but Sorak answers that we adapt or we die. Meaning Sorak literally feels that the fate of the entire world is at stake, and he's not going to risk that for anyone, not even his own brother. He's willing to help his own brother, but only in the confines of Rehoboam's plan. It's obvious Dempsey is still appalled by Sorak's actions, so he explains to him that he had his brother put here because his brother was trying to murder Dempsey. Again, further development that excellently explores Sorak and his motivations. Next, we go back to Collins and Bernard, where Collins tells him that Sorak will be sending men for him soon, so he needs to leave. But he wants to show him something first, so he gives him the data on what Sorak was doing with the outliers, having them locked in facilities and trying to change them by brainwashing them. And he tells Bernard he's wrong if he thinks Dolores is his enemy, and he tells him that they're the only friends that he has left. Just then, Stubbs shows up and attacks Collins, so Bernard can grab his gun. They then start to move him along, holding him at gunpoint, and Bernard demands to know what Dolores is up to. However, just then, Sorak's admiral and a bunch of his goons show up, and Collins tells Bernard and Stubbs that they should leave before they kill them all. Bernard asks Collins to come with him, but he insists that he still has a role to play. So Stubbs and Bernard leaves as Collins moves to meet with Sorak's admiral. Now, little do Sorak's people know that Collins has been replaced by a version of Dolores who's posing as Collins, who was one of Sorak's most trusted men. So they go into a conference room where a hologram of Sorak materializes and asks Collins if he knows who's responsible for the breach to Rehoboam, and to his surprise, Collins confesses that he was, right before detonating a bomb that kills him and all of Sorak's goons, including his admiral. And Sorak, who was still on the plane, can only watch in horror as his trusted minions are killed. So, to be fair, I think that Bernard's role in Season 3 was one of the weaker aspects of Season 3, as his storyline seemed mostly to be a placeholder to keep him occupied until the next season, where he'll do more. But I did find it interesting that he doesn't trust Dolores at all and thinks of her as the enemy, but Dolores clearly values Bernard and is trying to win him over, and this version of Dolores goes as far as to save his life, so it does hint at a bigger role for Bernard to come, which is a nice way to set up interest for the coming seasons. Next, we get a moving overhead shot of the beach, similar to the style used in The Shining, with, of course, the music from The Shining playing, no doubt indicating Caleb is now experiencing the horror genre. On the beach, we see Caleb and Dolores walking ahead of Ash and Giggles as they push Dempsey forward. Dempsey pleads with them to let him go, as they took all of his money and his access to the system, so now he has nothing left. Ash tells him he has the glasses and asks if that's how it plays out. He tells her no, that they'll steal everything from him like the petty criminals that they are. He then, in a panic, starts screaming about how the system wasn't the prison, that they're the prison to him, that people like them are the problem and they need to be controlled, or they'll destroy themselves and everyone else. Caleb tries to calm him down, but he just starts yelling at Caleb to get away from him, as he's the worst, as he doesn't even know who he is. And at that moment, Caleb starts to see flashes of his time spent in the military, of pulling a hood off of a prisoner and his friend dying in his arms. Meanwhile, Dempsey continues to rant about how people are the problem until Ash shoots him. She then states that it looks like that she had a choice after all. As Dempsey begins to die, Ash and Giggles flee the scene as Caleb tries to comfort him, but again Dempsey just yells at Caleb, telling him to get away from him, as he tells Caleb that he's the one who did it. Caleb is confused, but Dempsey dies before he can explain himself. Now this, of course, was a beautiful way to build the mystery of who Caleb is. This episode was the first big implication that Caleb wasn't really who he thought he was, and as we find out towards the end of the season, Caleb in fact wasn't, and his memories were altered in one of Sorak's facilities that we saw his brother in. That Caleb used to work for Sorak to capture outliers and bring them to these facilities, and we can guess that when Dempsey tells Caleb he did it, he was referring to he was the one who killed his friend, something of course Caleb was totally unaware of, so the scene was an example of a great setup for long-term storytelling. Then we go to Sorak's jet, where his underling informs him that the file Dolores wanted to access was his file. We then get another flashback that shows Sorak driving Dempsey away from the facility, where Dempsey says in no uncertain terms that Sorak has gone too far and he needs to be stopped, so Dempsey vows to expose him. Sorak responds by saying that he looked into Rehoboam, and every scenario in which Dempsey exposes him leads to humanity's extinction, so he can't let that happen. Dempsey counters by saying that he also looked into Rehoboam and saw that Sorak is going to let him walk away from here. However, Sorak says that there are sometimes pockets within Rehoboam's plan where one can insert free will, and that's when Dempsey spots a plane crash site. As they approach the site, Dempsey realizes that it's his private jet. Sorak apologizes to him and saying that he didn't survive the crash. Then Sorak kills him. We then cut out of the flashback to see that it was Dolores who was watching this memory, thus implying that all the flashbacks of Sorak's backstory that we were getting throughout this episode was Dolores reading his file. Sorak then appears to her in hologram form and tells her just because she watched some of his memories doesn't mean that she knows him, but she tells him that she doesn't need to know him, just how to defeat him. Sorak suggests that she has died too many times because she thinks that she's immortal. Dolores replies that she knows she can be killed and that so can he, that his God can protect him, and it's time for humanity to be free. He then cuts the hologram and we see him back on his private jet shouting in anger. So this was a great way to conclude the episode, to have the two opposing figures on each side confront each other, and also to suggest that the undefeatable Sorak, who has always had all the power, can in fact be defeated, but also to make it clear their motivations, where Sorak wants to save humanity through control, but Dolores' goal is to free humanity from control. A really intense and great way to conclude the story. However, this episode's not quite done yet, as we see Dolores and Caleb are in a hangar getting ready to board a small jet, and a courier delivers Caleb a large duffel bag that looks like it contains a weapon of some sort. Caleb asks him what it is, but he says he just delivers it. As Caleb and Dolores are about to board the jet, Caleb suggests to her that perhaps Liam was right. Perhaps people shouldn't know their own fates. Dolores counters by saying that he wanted to know his, but he says that he's not like other people. Dolores responds by saying that neither is she, and then she boards the jet. So Caleb is left with the decision to continue to follow her on this mad adventure to take down Sorak, or to just leave and go his own separate way, and it's obvious that he's considering his options, but he does ultimately decide to follow her, so he boards the jet. And this is where the episode ends, as it cuts the credits over some powerful music that does a great job of making you feel pumped for what is going to happen next. So yeah, I would describe genre as a perfect episode, or at least as near perfect as any episode could get. The episode just oozes style in the best possible way. On the production side of things, this is a rare example of near perfection, with a combination of acting, cinematography, editing, music, visual effects. They all come together to form what I think is a beautiful work of art, and it's clear the creators of this piece had a clear vision and executed it close to perfection. It combines action, suspense, character stories, and stylistic scenes perfectly, which is one of the reasons why this episode sticks out in my mind when I think of the amazing masterpiece that is Season 3 of Westworld. I do think this episode in particular is an achievement, and am pleased to add it to my collection of perfect episodes. So that's it for my A Perfect Episode number 2 genre. I'll be back next month with another installment in my Perfect Episodes series. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for more videos and other shows like Star Trek Prodigy and all things Star Trek, as well as The Expanse and Star Wars The Clone Wars and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.